Really from Plant Reviews. Today is the 23rd of February, and today in my, kind of a collection of videos, because many of my orchids are actually blooming in this period, I will talk about this amazingly beautiful winter blooming orchid that is Rhyncholaelia digbyana. The Rhyncholaelia digbyana is a species, an orchid species that was formerly classified in the genus Brassavola, and like other species of the genus Brassavola, is a plant that has flowers kind of very greenish white, and they are very strongly scented in the evening and at night. I will come back later about the fragrance of this plant. The species, even if formerly classified as Brassavola, then was reclassified as Rhyncholaelia in another genus because of the differences between this plant and Brassavola. And actually, in the genus Rhyncholaelia, there's only two species at the moment. There is this one, Rhyncholaelia digbyana, and also a species that is much smaller. I mean, this is a young plant, but when it's adult, it's still a plant that is smaller than Rhyncholaelia digbyana. And the other plant is Rhyncholaelia, the other species, sorry, is Rhyncholaelia glauca, that has flowers quite different from the Rhyncholaelia digbyana. You can see the flowers in Brassavola glauca are kind of star-shaped, and the lip is pretty smooth, while you can see that the lip in Brassavola digbyana is incredibly frilled. And actually it's even better. I put I put a garbage bag at the back, but it's because the garbage bag is black, so I think it really make the flower stand out because of the color of the flower, rather than because you can see the a white wall I have at the back doesn't give a very good contrast. Instead, you can see how really sharp is the definition if you have a dark background at the back of the flower. The species, as all orchids, is classified in the family Orchidaceae and in the subfamily Epidendroideae, in the tribe Epidendre and the subtribe Laeliinae. That is the most famous subtribe of the Epidendroideae, because it actually comprises the so-called by orchid lovers the Cattleya alliance, to which most of the most common orchids, most commonly known for fragrance orchids, are known, and are obviously the Cattleyas, the Brassavolas I already mentioned, and as well as the Laelia, and definitely the Rhyncholaelia, which is one of the most fragrant of all. This plant, the species, is native to Central America and was discovered by the Honduran botanist Jose Antonio Molina Rosito, and it was declared indeed the national flower of Honduras in 1969. The plant can grow really huge. It's not obviously a miniature orchid to grow indoors, but it is a plant that is really gorgeous, so I recommend to grow it even as a house plant, even if it's quite big. But if you have the space, it is a really amazing plant. The pseudobulbs are quite tall. They are about 15-20 centimeters tall, and as you can see, they are covered in this papery sheet until the very end of the pseudobulb, when the leaf basically connects with the pseudobulbs. The leaves are glaucous, that is, have this kind of grayish hue, and this kind of dirty dirty appearance, it's like perennially dusty, is due to the fact that they have a kind of protection against the sun rays, because this orchid is actually very, very common in extremely illuminated, in very, very bright areas. Indeed, this is an orchid that I grow on a southern facing windowsill, just next to the windowsill, even in summer. This is the plant, this one and Cattleya varshevictii are the plants that really are the most sunlight needing in my experience, and in the UK I cultivate them in a southern exposed windowsill all year round, including summer. Of course, if you live in an area that is hotter in latitudes closer to the equator, you might want to keep them in an eastern facing windowsill, or even in a north facing. Obviously depends by your conditions, but if you live in the United Kingdom or at similar latitudes, I would definitely recommend to keep this orchid in basically full sun, as much sun as possible. The plant blooms in winter. Indeed, today is the 23rd of February. I have this plant in bloom. It didn't bloom last year, but it bloomed 2 years ago in February again, and 3 years ago in March. So this is definitely for me a winter bloomer. I checked on the orchid species website, IOSPE, and it says it's a summer bloomer, but definitely not for me. So, for my experience, I can say that this plant for me blooms only in winter, like midwinter, early spring at the most. And the floral stems are very long, tubular, and basically the sheath from which the flowers also emerge are really, really long. I remember at some point when I saw the sheath for the first time, I thought there was another leaf forming, so I thought actually it was not a Rhyncholaelia glauca, this one was a kind of bifoliate Cattleya, but actually no. The reason that it looks bifoliate when the plant is developing the flower is just because the flower sheath is very, very long and resembles almost a second leaf. Usually Cattleyas have a much shorter floral sheath. And you can see how long is the flower stem, and each pseudobulb terminates with one leaf, and this in turn terminates in one flower stem, and of course one flower. As far as I know, sometimes they might occasionally produce two on the same flower stem, but generally they produce only one, and for me, indeed, this is the case. The flowers can grow up to 17 centimeters across. These ones are a bit smaller, I would say probably about 14-15. And the three sepals are very similar to the two upper petals, in that they are greenish, like very, very light green, and pretty smooth, even if the upper petals, in my case, have a tiny irregularity at the lower edge, while the lip is this beautiful heart-shaped, really large lip, greenish white as well, bright green actually in the center, and this bright green extends in the center of the, not only in the center of the flower, but actually in the center of the lip, as you can see. And what is also incredibly pleasant, at least for me, but many of the people who keep this plant, is of course the absolutely amazing frilliness of the lip. And this great lip is the reason, one of the reasons why Rhyncholaelia digbyana has been cultivated and hybridized with other species in the Cattleya alliance to produce many hybrids. Indeed, the Rhyncholaelia Cattleya is one of the most is a group of one of the most popular hybrids in the Cattleya alliance, and they inherit from this ancestor the beautiful frilly lip. Usually is not, of course, as frilly as the pure species, but still is very nicely frilly and kind of say flamboyant. This is the typical form of digbyana that I have. However, there is also another form called petala that has basically also the upper petals quite frilly, as you can see, so not only the lip, and in particular there is a variety called Mrs. Chase that is particularly famous and awarded for this frilliness, not only obviously on the lip but also on the upper petals. One of the hybrids that has been made most famous by the frilliness of the digbyana is the Rhyncholaelia Cattleya Golf Green Hairy Pig. That is this very funny name, but it is definitely one of the most beautiful Cattleyas Cattleya hybrids you can get, and indeed, as says in Orchid Roots, the parents are Rhyncholaelia digbyana was the pollen parent, while the pod parent, the seed parent, was a hybrid called Cattleya moscombe. However, if you see the ancestors, Rhyncholaelia digbyana basically amounts for about the 50% of the genetics of this beautiful hybrid, and I suspect that obviously was the fimbripetala that was variety that was used because of the frilliness as well of the upper petals. This plant is a plant that does great on bark, and you can cultivate also mounted on cork. However, personally, considering that I found this plant really loves humid conditions, I found that for me works great cultivated it in semi-hydro. I converted it about 4 or 5 years ago, and actually this plant bloomed after I converted it in semi-hydro, so I have to say that this was definitely a very good choice. Other than that, please remember to cultivate this plant in full sun if you live in the UK or similar latitudes, or anyway with very bright light. It might be indirect if you live closer to the equator. But this is a plant that really can take a lot of sun, like other orchids. This is a plant also very vigorous. You can see that now it has basically outgrown the pot, and I will need it to divide it when it starts producing new roots. That is the time when you repot an orchid. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I almost forget to speak about the most amazing quality of this plant, its fragrance. The fragrance, this plant bloomed for me twice, as I said before, and honestly was a bit disappointed because I could barely detect the fragrance on the first and the second blooming. I could smell something like citrusy and lemony, and a little bit like of an insecticide undertone. But really, I have really to stick my nose into it. I couldn't detect it much. Last year, it didn't bloom at all, possibly because I changed position, so it didn't receive much sunlight. So I changed again position to put it as with much sunlight as possible, and this year it bloomed with three beautiful flowers. And I have to say that just 1 or 2 days after the flowers opened, the fragrance started filling not only the room that I was keeping this orchid, but also the entire floor of the entire second floor where I keep this orchid, as well as the upper part of the stairs. So finally, I was complaining a lot about the fragrance that almost was almost undetectable in this plant, but actually this plant has an incredible fragrance. Sometimes you need only to be patient with the plants. If the plants doesn't release much fragrance at the first or the second blooming, please allow some time because it might have an incredible fragrance just at the following blooming. So remember, if you have a plant very well known for the fragrance but doesn't smell much the first time, just wait a couple more years and hopefully you will be very much rewarded like I was by this plant. I was almost thinking to give it away for some other fragrant orchids or fragrant digbyana. I was really wondering why it didn't smell at all, and I have to say the smell is incredible. It's citrusy, very lemon-like, and still with a little bit of like insecticide undertone. It's not something like really bad, but is slightly pungent, but still is quite an amazing fragrance, and I would say not unpleasant at all, because it permeates the air so much that it makes really an incredible centerpiece of a plant in your house. Unfortunately, the blooms don't last long. Usually they last 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the very most, but I would say they last only a couple of weeks usually. But I have to say it is absolutely a stunning flower, so even if it's only for 2 weeks, it really worth to keep this plant, in my opinion, in your house. It is also a plant that is not too difficult to find to source, so you not very much on garden center, but on websites you can find many websites to sell this plant. In particular, I bought this from orchidgarden.uk in Poland before Brexit. Unfortunately, in UK you can't buy from EU anymore, but there are other British sellers who sell this plant routinely, this species, and I really would recommend this species, as it is definitely one of my favorite orchids. As usual, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, obviously, please let me know, and of course, I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.